Welcome back to the channel. After extensive UCL fantasy coverage over the weekend, the full focus now shifts towards FPL once again. I have published a transfer tips video where I discussed the likes of Jean-Philippe Mateta and Matheus Cunha, so you're well prepared to bolster that forward line with all the injuries and suspensions. And there's also my transfer plans video where I delve into my initial plans, and that will be updated on in my upcoming team selection video. And there's going to be much more like the deadline stream. If you also want to see a reaction stream in the next couple of days, then let me know down in the comment section below. Like this video, get it to the 200 likes, and let your feelings be known. Smash the subscribe button and also hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream. There's going to be even more UCL fantasy videos and live streams over the next week for the second leg of the round of 16. And in today's video, I'll build the best wildcard team whilst delving into all the stats, injury updates, and other things that have happened in the last couple of days. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. After Newcastle's 2-1 defeat at home in the FA Cup to Brighton, Eddie Howe provided an update on Alexander Isak, and he said the following: "I think a little bit of fatigue for Alex. I think he worked incredibly hard for us. Hopefully no injury, just fatigue." He also gave an update on Lewis Hall, but it's not really worth talking about because Newcastle themselves have posted an update today, and Lewis Hall missed the rest of the season, and hopefully he does recover very soon, but he has sustained an injury to a bone in his foot. So he missed the Carabao Cup final. That was already reported yesterday, and I had the graphics ready to provide that update to you. But this morning we got that definitive update, and Lewis Hall will not play again this season. Another blow to Newcastle, who reportedly could also miss Sven Botman for the Carabao Cup final. And Alexander Isak should be fine, and if there are any more updates, I'll let you know in future videos and podcasts, including the live stream on Saturday for the deadline. But it's not looking too good for Newcastle right now. Let's now move on to other injury updates, which include Matoma, who also played in that game against Newcastle, and Hörsler said the following: "We have to wait for the scan, and then I can say more about that, but hopefully it's not that bad. Let's wait." So it is a potential knee injury. I think Matoma himself in an interview was quite positive about it, but we still have to wait for the scans and what the results may bring. But I think Matoma is still a decent option, but that yellow flag will put a lot of people off from investing in him, and that's going to be very frustrating to say the least. We're getting so many injuries and suspensions in the last couple of days. That also includes Jean-Philippe Mateta, and I did give this update in my transfer tips video, and Oliver Glasner was quite definitive, saying that he's going to definitely miss Gameweek 28 against Ipswich Town, and the hope is that Mateta returns before the end of the month for the FA Cup quarterfinals. But he's going to be out for a couple of weeks, it seems, and that's going to be another massive blow to our FPL squads and also to Crystal Palace. How will they fare without their star striker, who's been banging in the goals, the joint top scorer in the Premier League in 2025 alongside Mohamed Salah? He was going to be one of my transfers in, as discussed in my video last week, but now I have to look elsewhere, and it's just a shame because we were blessed with options in that forward line with Mateta, Cunha, Chris Wood, Haaland, Isak, and now we're going to struggle to get 3 competent forwards in our FPL squads. But I think it's also worth mentioning the FA Cup draw for the quarterfinals. So we've got Fulham versus Crystal Palace, Preston North End against Aston Villa, Bournemouth versus Man City, and Brighton facing Nottingham Forest. A lot of these are very tough to call. I think the only one where you think there's an outstanding favourite is Aston Villa facing a championship team in the quarterfinals. But I think it's going to be very important for blank Gameweek 34 and what that could mean for double Gameweek 33, or possibly those fixtures staying in blank Gameweek 34, or perhaps going in another direction. So I think it's definitely worth having at the back of your mind. And once we get more information and we get closer to that blank game week, we can provide definitive updates and see which teams we should be avoiding, how we can navigate all these doubles and blanks with a free hit, the wild card and other boosters. So very interesting times are ahead in FPL, despite the fact we are approaching the very end of this season. We are in March and things are moving very quickly. But let's now move on to other sections of this game week analysis, and that includes the permutations of blank Gameweek 34, which you can see on screen. We have 4 confirmed fixtures for blank Gameweek 34 after the FA Cup results over the weekend. So Chelsea versus Everton and Liverpool versus Tottenham were already kind of penciled in for Gameweek 34. But we now have Newcastle versus Ipswich Town, and that means no back-to-back doubles for Newcastle, which was a possibility with their Gameweek 32 double already in play against Crystal Palace and Manchester United. And the other one is Wolves versus Leicester City. So all of those teams are out of the FA Cup, and they will have a fixture in Gameweek 34, and you can see the permutations for the other possible blanks like Arsenal versus Crystal Palace. So the match will be postponed in the following situation if Crystal Palace beat Fulham in the FA Cup quarterfinals. In the case of Bournemouth versus Manchester United, if Bournemouth beat Man City in the FA Cup quarterfinals, that will become a blank. The same goes for Brighton versus West Ham. If Brighton beat Nottingham Forest, then they will blank as well. So you can see all the permutations and what could happen in blank Gameweek 34 on screen. Let me know your predictions in the comments section. How are you planning to navigate all these blanks and doubles? Which chips do you have available? All of these questions are very important. But these are my predictions for Gameweek 28. And looking at the here and now, I've gone for Nottingham Forest 1, Manchester City 2, Brighton 1, Fulham 1, Crystal Palace 2, Ipswich Town 1. Originally, I went for a 3-1 Crystal Palace win, but without Jean-Philippe Mateta, I think Palace might struggle a little bit more. And I have to say, Ipswich Town were very impressive against Nottingham Forest in the FA Cup and were very unfortunate to lose on penalties. Liverpool 4, Southampton 0 is kind of just a question of how many do Liverpool score. I don't see the Saints causing many problems. Brentford 2, Aston Villa 2. And the Villains got a very impressive 3-1 away win against Club Brugge in the Champions League. They were under the cosh and conceded some big chances, but they got the job done. And their record against Brentford is fairly impressive. I've also gone for Wolves 1, Everton 2. Matheus Cunha is suspended until Gameweek 31. That is a massive blow there for Wolves, and also another problem for our FPL teams. Chelsea 3, Leicester 0. I might give Leicester a goal here, but ultimately I think Chelsea will win by 2 or 3 goals. Tottenham Hotspur 2, Bournemouth 2, Man United 0, Arsenal 1. I'm a little bit more confident for this one now after Arsenal's 7-1 win away from home against PSV. They set a Champions League record in a knockout game, and it was a very impressive performance. Arsenal were clinical, but they can still struggle, especially against low to mid blocks, and I think Man United will not give Arsenal the space that PSV did. And I've kind of changed this prediction all week. I went for 1-0 United, then 1-1, but I'll stick with 1-0 Arsenal for now. You will see my final predictions all locked in during the deadline stream, and it's a very tough one to call. I don't think Arsenal's motivation will be as strong in the Premier League, but they can use the remaining games to build a solid platform and see if they can translate that into a very solid Champions League run. And the final game, West Ham 2, Newcastle 3, but Anthony Gordon picked up a red card for violent conduct against Brighton. He will be out until Gameweek 31, so that is yet another suspension to think about. Lewis Hall is out for the season. Alexander Isak, despite not being flagged, is going to be doubtful, but I think he will start, and he's right up there in my captaincy list, which you'll see very soon. But before I do that, there's a few things I want to showcase, and that includes the heat map. So the team weakness for Leicester City is in those central areas, but you could argue it's all over the pitch. They are in absolute turmoil right now, and if we actually compare this player, Cole Palmer, his heat map, which you can see just underneath the blue circles. And what this basically means is the shot volume is represented by the heat map for Cole Palmer. And the blue circles indicate the shots conceded by Leicester all season. And it seems like a perfect match. And despite Palmer's recent struggles, and he's been really poor in terms of FPL output, I think he's going to get a big return against Leicester. He's right up there in my captaincy list, as he typically is. Despite the recent form not being there, I completely understand it. If he blanks against Leicester, there's going to be a big push towards selling him in blank Gameweek 29 or possibly just afterwards. And Arsenal away isn't the easiest of fixtures for a blank Gameweek, but Cole Palmer is still one of the best options in Fantasy Premier League, and he'll prove it fairly soon. Let's now look at the odds for clean sheets and over 2 goals. Liverpool are top once again, facing the worst team in the league in Southampton. A 50% chance of keeping a clean sheet according to fantasyfootballpundit.com, and the over 2 goal stats are taken by Drafthound. They put Liverpool at 71% chance of scoring more than 2 goals. Chelsea are second, you got Crystal Palace in third, and I've highlighted Arsenal after their 7-1 win against PSV, but in the 2 games before that, they failed to score against West Ham and Nottingham Forest. So with Arsenal, it's either feast or famine. When they click, they're a joy to watch. If you give them the spaces, they'll punish you, but if you kind of approach that game with a mid-block or a low block, you can cause a lot of problems, and they struggle to create chances. Wolves and Brighton complete the top 6, and it's ordered in terms of clean sheet probabilities, and in last place is Southampton, to no one's surprise. They have a 4% chance of keeping a clean sheet and only 5% for scoring over 2 goals, but I'm sure you're very interested in the top 10 captaincy list. I think number 1 isn't going to be of any surprise. He has been in this spot for the last couple of months. Mohamed Salah facing the worst team in the league amongst single game weeks, this might be the most appealing triple captaincy opportunity. I've put Cole Palmer in second, facing Leicester at home. Isak is third, despite the yellow flag he had very recently. It is no longer there. He scored the penalty against Brighton, and he's got a good record against West Ham. But I actually bought him the last time he was facing West Ham, and Newcastle lost 1-0 at home, and Isak was a very big troll for me at that period of time. Diogo Jota is fourth, so essentially anybody who plays down the middle for Liverpool against Southampton would be in this list. It could be Luis Diaz, and originally I had Cody Gakpo, who wasn't in training ahead of their clash against PSG on Wednesday night. Trent Alexander-Arnold is fifth. Watkins is sixth. He has a terrific record against his former club Brentford, and despite blanking in a 3-1 win against Club Brugge in the Champions League, I think Ollie Watkins is a very good choice this week. I've put Erling Haaland in seventh, and we could see a shift in the template where people sell Cole Palmer in game week 29 or 30 to go for the Norwegian striker, but I wouldn't be doing it this week. Nkuku is eighth, and I've put Heung-min Son in ninth. He's got a fairly decent record against the Cherries, and Mbeumo is 10th, but I have to say, I'm not fully convinced about Mbeumo being in this top 10 list. He's a great option overall, but Brentford don't have the best of records against Aston Villa, and if it wasn't for Jean-Philippe Mateta's injury, he would have easily been in this list, and that top 10 would have looked very solid on paper. If you have any thoughts about other captaincy options we should consider, then let me know down in the comment section below, and the same goes for all the graphics and updates I provided in this video. But let's now head over to the best wildcard team for Game Week 28. Over the last week, my squad value has actually gone down. It's currently 104.5 million when you combine my team value alongside the money in the bank. Some people watching will have even more, others will have even less. We all know this. It all depends on how much value you have tied up in certain players. But I'll start off with the two goalkeepers and build a solid foundation in each position for the long term. This will help you navigate blanks and doubles alike, but it can vary, and you might want to go for one or two different picks in each position depending on your chip strategy, because some of you might have everything available, including the assistant manager. Others might have nothing left, and that's why I think the chips and team circumstances are very crucial when building your wildcard team. Matt Sells made a crucial penalty save in that very tense shootout against Ipswich Town as Nottingham Forest progressed to the FA Cup quarter-finals. They are on course for a spectacular season. They're sitting third in the Premier League. They could have a chance of FA Cup glory, and it is a big club with a lot of history and pedigree. And Matt Sells is the top scoring goalkeeper in Fantasy Premier League this season, and I've been quite consistent over the last couple of months. There are three standout options in this position: Sells, Pickford and Raya. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them, but in the case of Everton, they've got some tough fixtures coming up from Game Week 30 onwards, so I might lean towards Sells and David Raya instead, and Pickford could fall down to third in that podium. But Sells is my current preference between the sticks. I think it's a great acquisition from now until the end of the season. And if you look at Nottingham Forest's fixtures after Game Week 28, they are spectacular, and they include a very plumb fixture in blank Game Week 29 against Ipswich Town, who of course they just faced in the FA Cup. And the backup goalkeeper is Areola. You don't need to go very expensive and have Pickford and Sells and rotate between them, because I think you'll leave some bench points from time to time. So my recommendation is just to have a cheap goalkeeper who can come in if needed. And Areola is fairly injury prone himself, so it wouldn't surprise me if Fabianski became an option once again in Fantasy Premier League this season. But going for Sells and Areola should set you up for the rest of the campaign. To be completely honest, I'm not a big fan of Reine Nuri, and he has burned me in the last couple of seasons whenever I've bought him, but for Game Week 29, he is one of the standout defenders, facing Southampton away, and even this week, it is Everton at home, who have been in great form under David Moyes, and they could cause Wolves all sorts of problems, but I think Nuri compensates for that with the attacking potential, and he's worth a punt, I think, for the next couple of weeks, and Wolves are top of the fixture difficulty rating until Game Week 34. It's just a crying shame that Matheus Cunha, their star player, will miss half of those matches. But Nuri does make it into this wildcard squad. If you aren't too bothered about blank Game Week 29 and are happy with having 10 outfield players, you can go for a Liverpool defender like Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is my preference, or just go for Konate, maybe Virgil van Dijk, depending on your budget and other circumstances. But next up, I'm going for a player who features in blank Game Week 29, who is a very good option until the end of the season, and that's Gabriel, who actually got 4 points in UCL Fantasy because of ball recoveries, but in FPL terms, it would have been a blank, of course, and he can score goals. It has been a while since Arsenal have scored a set piece. It is Man United away next, then Chelsea at home, but if you look at the fixtures afterwards, they are easier on paper, but I think Arsenal can keep clean sheets when you least expect them to, and they've still got the best defence in the Premier League this season. Some of you might want to double up on the Gunners defensively with Raya in goal, or go for Saliba in that backline. Jurriën Timber scored the opening goal against PSV on Tuesday night, but Gabriel remains my favourite option from the Gunners. I'm also going to recommend a player who blanks in 29, but he's been so good that he deserves a kind of inclusion in this squad, and he doubles in Gameweek 32, and that is Daniel Munoz, the most informed defender in Fantasy Premier League over the last couple of months. He's got the goals and assist potential, and Crystal Palace have been in fantastic form, keeping clean sheets and getting a lot of good results, especially on their travels. So I'd still recommend going for Munoz if you are able to do so, and he's my favourite Crystal Palace asset by far, especially with Mateta out for the next couple of weeks. But let's now complete this defensive line. I would still recommend one Bournemouth defender, either Kerkez or Haaland. If you've got the funds, I'd go for Kerkez for the attacking threat, but I think Haaland offers better value, and I will show you an alternative wildcard squad with some different picks in each position, and that includes Haaland in that defensive line, but you can't go wrong with either one of them, in my opinion. And despite Everton's poor fixtures, I'd still recommend a cheap option as your fifth defender, and Mykolenko can do the job, and even in some of these difficult games, he can keep a clean sheet and surprise you with a 6 or 7 pointer. His ceiling won't be that high very often, but it was actually in the reverse fixture against Wolves where he got a double-digit haul, and I think Mykolenko is a very underrated pick in FPL. So this defensive line gives you a nice balance. Most of them, except Daniel Munoz, feature in blank Gameweek 29, and you can always go to a Liverpool defender after the blank. And if I were to get rid of one of these defenders long term, it would be Reynate Nuri, despite Wolves' fixtures. Sometimes we overthink things in Fantasy Premier League and all these different fantasy games like UCL Fantasy, but my advice would not be to get rid of Salah in the coming weeks. I know you might be tempted by a punt on Haaland, and selling Salah would be your cash cow, but that would not be my recommendation. You are getting rid of the best player in world football, arguably, at least in the forward positions. He is churning out goals and assists on such a regular basis, and he's facing the worst team in the Premier League. So if you sell Salah for 1 week when he blanks in 29, and you can bring him back for Gameweek 30, that looks really good on paper. But if it means going without Salah for one Gameweek where Liverpool feature, I think that would be a huge mistake, because he can get a double-digit haul against any team at the moment, especially in the Premier League. I'm also going to go for Cole Palmer, but hear me out. If you are looking to go for Erling Haaland, Palmer would be the one I'd sacrifice, especially in blank Gameweek 29 or Gameweek 30. So I'm not completely opposed to that idea. I think with Salah, that would be a huge mistake. But considering Palmer's form and Chelsea's inconsistencies since December, I would be more on board with this, but I still think Palmer makes a very good acquisition in this midfield. And let's put it this way, would I rather have Palmer and Isak or Haaland and a cheap midfielder? I'm going to go for Palmer and Isak because of the combination of those players and what they've proven on a consistent basis, especially in the last year. I'm also going to go for another consistent choice who is much cheaper but still a relatively template pick, also mid-priced, in Brian Mbeumo, who costs 8 million. And if you want to go against a template, maybe going against Mbeumo is one such play. And if you have this sort of structure where you can only go for one mid-priced midfielder, I think Jarrod Bowen could be the kind of differential play. You go against Brian Mbeumo, and that's the way you can really go against the template and separate yourself from the rest of the pack. But in this wildcard team, I've gone for both of them in the same squad, which is something I haven't done in recent podcasts, and that all depends on your budget and how you allocate the funds elsewhere. For example, if you go for Trent instead of Nuri, you wouldn't be able to go for Bowen and Mbeumo at the same time whilst having a Palmer or Erling Haaland in your setup. But it's all team dependent, and if you are able to do this sort of thing, I'd highly recommend it. The midfield is still the most important position, especially with the faltering forward line we have now with all the injuries and suspensions. But to complete things in the midfield, I'm going for Justin Kluivert, who costs 6.1 million now, and he is another template pick, so you might want to go for Antoine Semenyo to be a little bit different, but sometimes I just go for the better option, and in this case, Justin Kluivert is the one. I mean, in FPL, you have to pick the players you ultimately think will score the most points and that you generally consider to be the best choices. Even for the captaincy, for example, sometimes people just say, oh, I think Salah's the best captain, but I'm going to go for this player just to be different. And I completely get it if you want to chase rank, but I always think it's about the combination of players you have in your squad. And despite all 5 of these midfielders being template, I don't think many people have this combination of players. And to be fair, Jarrod Bowen does have very low ownership, and you've got some differentials in the defensive line and also amongst the forwards. The standout replacement for Jean-Philippe Mateta and Matheus Cunha would be Chris Wood. He is the highest scoring forward in Fantasy Premier League with excellent fixtures to round off the season. That includes a very appealing fixture against Ipswich Town in blank game week 29, so he ticks so many boxes. It is Man City at home this week, and he hasn't got a great record against them. In fact, he has never scored against his favourite club, but I think Chris Wood is still a great choice, and I'd highly recommend him even this week, but you could maybe afford to wait until blank game week 29, and that would be the definitive best occasion to buy Chris Wood, and I don't think it's worth overcomplicating things. The only downside is that he's very template. He was a big differential in game week 1 when I started this campaign with Chris Wood, and now he's got over 40% ownership, but there's a reason for that. He is a bonus points machine. 1 goal is all that's needed to get maximum bonus points, and he has done it so often, just like Matheus Cunha. Next up is going to be my other favourite forward from blank game week 29, and it does form an offensive double up here in Visser, but it's worth mentioning that Brentford's fixtures aren't great from blank game week 29 onwards. Bournemouth away isn't the best of games in that blank, and then Brentford have a sea of red in the FDR, but I think some of those aren't too shabby, like Chelsea, for example. I think Brentford could score goals against them, and Visser and Mbeumo is a nice differential duo, you could say. But if you want to go in a different direction, Ivanosen might be one to target. He scored in the FA Cup against Wolves. Not to mention, Alexander Isak is still my favourite forward besides the obvious Chris Wood, and he does make it into this squad. But I was very consistent for the last couple of months saying that the best front three is Chris Wood, Isak, and then one of Jean-Philippe Mateta or Matheus Cunha, and the other one is Erling Haaland. He is probably the best captaincy option for blank game week 29 and also game week 30, but he's also very expensive at 14.7 million, so maybe you could go in a different direction, sell Cole Palmer. But when I was building this squad, going for Haaland meant getting rid of Isak and Palmer at the same time, and I didn't like that. In terms of the overall 50-man squad, I like this balance, and it really does well for blank game week 29, double game week 32, and other doubles like game week 33, for example. And with free transfers, you can then build towards game week 32 after the blank is concluded and invest in more Crystal Palace and Newcastle assets. Top tip I can give you is to use websites like FPL.team to visualize future game weeks, compare different transfer plans, chip strategies, and much more. For this wildcard squad, Matt Sells will be in goal, but it's not the easiest of decisions. You could arguably go for Areola instead, and West Ham kept a clean sheet at St James's Park in their last meeting, but going to the West Ham Stadium, they don't have a great record against Newcastle, albeit Newcastle have a lot of injury problems and suspensions. Aït-Nouri, Munoz and Gabriel forms a decent defensive line with Palmer, Kluivert, Salah and Mbeumo. I really like the look of this midfield. The only downside is that it's very template. Isak, Visser and Chris Wood complete this squad, but I do have Jarrod Bowen on the bench. I think the biggest dilemma in terms of sorting out this squad is either to start Bowen or Visser, and I'm currently going for Visser, but that is a very close call. Mykolenko and Kirkes are the other options on the bench alongside Areola, and the expected points is 68.7. Salah is my favourite captain. If you want to go different, maybe Cole Palmer is worth a punt, but I always recommend going for the player you back to do very well, and Mohamed Salah, facing the worst team in the league, seems very easy. The only thing you could maybe say against it is, could Salah be rotated or at least have his minutes managed? That's a possibility, but I still think he starts the game, and if he gets 60-70 minutes, that is enough to produce a mega haul. Now for blank game week 29, without making any transfers, you would have a full starting 11 of Sells away to Ipswich Town, and I have to say he's the best goalkeeper for blank game week 29. If you were building a free hit, Sells would be my top goalkeeper pick. A back four of Kirkes, Aït-Nouri, Gabriel, Mykolenko, Palmer, Kluivert, Mbeumo and Bowen, and then Chris Wood and Visser up front. Now there are some conflicts and clashes. You've got Mykolenko up against Bowen, Gabriel against Palmer, and you've got Kirkes facing Mbeumo and Visser. That is probably the biggest weakness with this blank game week 29 setup, but the expected points is 47.2, which is quite high considering the fact it's a blank game week. 0.5 million in the bank for me. Some of you watching might have even more at your disposal, others might have even less, and in that sort of scenario, you might have to make a few sacrifices down the line and maybe avoid some of these conflicts and clashes, maybe go for a different striker instead of Visser, and Ivanosen would be one recommendation as a differential forward. But let's look at the Erling Haaland draft for game week 28 first, and then a quick preview of blank game week 29. So you could have Sells in goal, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Munoz and Gabriel forming your defensive line, Kluivert, Salah, Mbeumo and Mitoma, if he's available, with Wissa, Haaland and Chris Wood up front, and a bench of Areola, Nwaneri, Mykolenko and Haaland, but that means no Isak, no Cole Palmer, and downgrading Kirkes to Haaland amongst a few other changes compared to the other draft you saw. And I would go for Salah captain, and as the vice, you could go for Erling Haaland here, but with Blank Gameweek 29 in mind, you could make one free transfer to bolster your prospects here, but you could really just kind of wing it, and you don't need to make a single move. Sells in goal again, Haaland, Gabriel, Mykolenko, Nwaneri, Kluivert, Mbeumo, and Mitoma, with Wissa, Chris Wood, and Haaland as your captain, and Chris Wood will take the vice captaincy. Once we get closer to Blank Gameweek 29, I'll provide a captaincy list like I did in this video for Gameweek 28, and all the stats and detailed analysis will be broken down for you across all of my videos and podcasts, and that includes the live streams in terms of reactions and deadlines. And there we have it, another wildcard video for FPL has been wrapped up for Gameweek 28. It's a slightly awkward time to wildcard, but for some people it might be the right thing to do. I think some of you might even consider wildcarding in Blank Gameweek 29, and that could also serve as a free hit, and you can have a solid platform for the rest of the season. But don't forget, the transfers no longer reset, so you can actually have 3 to 4 transfers in your back pocket after wildcarding, and that could really help you to get some more Crystal Palace and Newcastle players for double Gameweek 32, not to mention another double Gameweek in 33 and the blank in Gameweek 34. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's try to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 33,000 subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you very soon for those UCL Fantasy videos and the deadline stream next Tuesday. But let's not forget, this Saturday, there's another deadline for FPL, and I can't wait to have you on board for that deadline stream.